I love ancient mythology. Growing up, I was really into Greek mythology and loved reading the myths. As I've gotten older, I've really enjoyed learning more about other mythologies, legends, and folklore in other cultures. So when I see a game that has mythology theme to it, I'm intrigued. Admittedly, our game for today has a bit of a weird combination for this theme. Immortal Redneck has a combination of Egyptian mythology and, well, rednecks. It may be a weird combo, but the question is, does this combination work or not? If the combo doesn't quite work, is the game still able to be enjoyed? So let's look at Immortal Redneck and find out. Immortal Redneck is a roguelike FPS developed by Crema. It was released in 2017 for PC, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Switch, and is rated T for fantasy violence and language. You can find it for around $19.99 on all platforms. Technically, for whatever reason, the Steam version is 4 cents cheaper. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. Personally, I'm playing on the PlayStation 4 version on a PlayStation 5, so some of the performance issues that I get to later in the review may differ depending on platform. Immortal Redneck does have a theme of a redneck dealing with Egyptian mythology, but that is really for the most part window dressing, because this game doesn't really have much of a story going for it. The most you get is at the very start of the game. Your redneck character is four-wheeling through the Egyptian desert and gets in a wreck. He's somehow brought back to life as a mummy, and that's really all of the story. I'd say you're tasked with climbing and defeating the bosses of 3 pyramids, but there isn't really any story there to tell you what you're doing, let alone why you're doing it. This doesn't really change as you make your way through the various pyramids and progress in the game. There isn't any extra story really until beating the entire game, and even then it's not really giving you any closure, reason for doing all you've done, or anything like that. It's basically you sit around a campfire drinking beer with a couple of the other random characters in the game. It's unsatisfying, to say the least. So it's kind of hard not to be disappointed by the lack of story. It makes the combination of themes even weirder, and to be honest, I didn't really feel like the themes gelled well together in the first place. I mean, I've known some rednecks over the years, and they don't tend to travel outside of the country. So redneck finding his way to Egypt in the first place is a bit suspicious to start us off. And I do think that this is an American redneck because it talks about Kansas and things like that. So it's not like this is like an Egyptian redneck if there isn't even such a thing in the first place. Even then, this combination just doesn't really add a lot to the game. It seems like the redneck character is mainly used as a humor device for some of the one-liners said over the course of the game, and maybe to inspire a handful of guns that are more quote-unquote redneck. It just seems out of place, partly because the redneck character is just rather vulgar and full of foul language, but the game itself isn't. It's rather tame, actually. Despite killing monsters throughout the game, there is no blood, no gore. The monsters aren't even particularly scary. It just creates this weird vibe, like the developers weren't quite sure if they wanted to make an adult game or a game for a more general audience. So since the story and theme is a bit of a bust here, the question becomes, is the gameplay good enough to make you not care about the story and theme? And my answer here is a resounding yes. As I've already said, Immortal Redneck is a first-person shooter roguelike that has you trying to defeat monsters and a final boss in 3 different pyramids. When you start Immortal Redneck, you don't really have many options. You pretty much have to head directly to the first pyramid that unlocks for you. You start out playing with the default class in the game, the Redneck. Each class starts with a certain set of weapons, a special ability, and a passive ability. So for example, the Redneck's starting weapons are a pistol, a shotgun, and dynamite. His special ability increases his weapon's rate of fire for a short time, while his passive skill is more ammo from ammo boxes. You are then able to unlock more classes called Favor of the Gods later on. The pyramids are randomly generated, and each pyramid has 7 floors to fight through. Each pyramid has a mini-boss on the 3rd floor and a final boss on the 7th floor. While battling your way through the pyramid, there are a number of pickups that you can come across, both by killing monsters and opening chests that you can find as you explore the pyramid. The most common pickups are ammo, which can come in small or large sizes, steak, which replenishes health, and gold, which you can use to upgrade the redneck when you go back to the starting area, either by dying in a run or by defeating the pyramid. There are 2 other drops that are rarer as well. These are weapons and scrolls. Weapons are pretty straightforward, as they are weapons that you can pick up in place of your already equipped weapons. Weapons can range from very helpful to pretty useless depending on the weapon. So part of the game will be learning what weapons are good and what ones are not, so that you can know what to pick up as you go. Scrolls, on the other hand, will give you a random modifier. These can be either positive or negative. They can increase your attack, fire rate, or do something like remove your crosshairs, reduce your jumps by 1, make you lose gold, or do damage to you each time you jump in midair. Unfortunately, there is no way to know whether a scroll will be positive or negative, and some runs can be ruined by a poorly timed negative scroll, or 2 or 3. One other thing that you can find in the pyramids are blueprints for medallions. These look like scrolls but are colored blue. These allow you to craft medallions at the shop that you unlock at your starting area. These medallions can give you a boost to certain stats or pickups, can provide you with an extra challenge, or can allow you to start a pyramid after the mini-boss for that pyramid. You can only have one medallion equipped at a time, so you have to make a choice about what you want to accomplish for the run that you're trying to go for. After each run, you return to your starting area and are able to spend your money at the upgrade tree. This allows you to increase your stats, unlock extra jumps, or unlock the favor of the gods, which will unlock new classes for you to use. Each class, except for the redneck, can also get an upgrade to their abilities in the tree as well. You can also set your medallions at the store or buy scrolls, guaranteed good scrolls, or replay the same map again without getting any money. Personally, I really enjoy the gameplay loop that Immortal Redneck offers. It's a fun, frantic time as you make your way through the various monsters and traps that the pyramid holds. There is a decent amount of aim assist, at least for the PlayStation 4 version, and so it allows you to run around and still hit enemies pretty well without necessarily having to have precision aim. Some may not like this, but I thought it worked well for the game, but sometimes depending on your shooting angle, it doesn't always work the best. Like when you're trying to shoot people that are like on a platform above you at any angle, it can sometimes hit the platform even if your sights are right on the enemy. Since there are only 6 bosses in the game, you're going to probably get pretty used to fighting them as you progress through the game. They are all pretty different and require different strategies to tackle, but none of them are too difficult to figure out. In all honesty, I felt that the first Pyramids boss was probably the hardest of all of them, and maybe the final boss has some difficulty to it as well, but those were probably the ones that I had the hardest time with. Pyramid 2, honestly, I didn't spend a lot of time in my playing because I beat it on my first run through and don't really have any need to go back to it too often, so it was kind of a very underutilized pyramid in my playing. Of course, now this all depends on how well you do with the fast first-person shooter gameplay. I wouldn't necessarily call this game easy, but it is a game that allows you to purchase upgrades as you go on, so you'll get stronger over time and the game will get easier. Once you get a significant amount of your upgrades, it's pretty hard to really kind of have things go south too much. Now, once you beat the game, you may still gain fun out of Immortal Redneck if you enjoy the gameplay. But to be honest, there isn't a lot to do once you've completed the 3 pyramids. You can try to go through the games using the different class setups, but this doesn't really get you anything within the game, nor does it really change the core gameplay enough to probably really warrant it. If you are a big fan of achievements and trophies, this game is perfect for that, as it will lead you to attempt various things with the game that you may not otherwise, like beating the final pyramid with all the various favors of the gods, beating the final pyramid with the cursed and plague medallions, and maxing out the skill tree. If you aren't into achievements, it's possible that you'll get a bit tired of the gameplay loop before too long. Like, while it's fun, there just isn't really a lot to keep you coming back. Personally, even as someone who likes trophies, some of these trophies are a bit of an unnecessary grind. Mainly the kill 25,000 enemies trophy, as I've done almost all the other trophies except the die 50 times one, and don't really know how close I am to getting it. With very little else to do other than run pyramids for more kills, the game is starting to lose some of its fun for me. It's not a chore to play, but it's just easy and not really very challenging at this point anymore. Just look at the art style of Immortal Redneck. And yeah, the art style is not necessarily one of realism or even just kind of cartoony blood or gore. Instead, it goes for a more cartoon style almost, that even goes to the point where some of the enemies are kind of on even the cute side of things. It's a weird decision paired with the redneck's love of a certain 4-letter word, but here we are. To be honest, a lot of things in this category, from enemy designs, environments, weapons, and music, fall into a kind of middle range for me. There isn't much terribly impressive, but at the same time, it's not really bad either. Some enemies are really interesting looking, while 2 types are just alternate colors of floating cubes, which isn't as interesting. Environments have an Egyptian vibe and become more future tech infused with later pyramids, and that can be pretty fun looking, but isn't probably going to really wow you with the environments. Music fits the game and is fine, but it's probably not going to be a soundtrack you head right out to listen to on its own either. It's just okay. About the only aspect of the sound and music area that I didn't really like too much were the voice clips of the redneck.
Frogs legs in Europe. No way!
The humor really wasn't that funny most of the time, and when one managed to get a chuckle out of me, it's questionable whether this was even really redneck humor and not just general pop culture humor. So I think the voice work here was probably the worst aspect, but everything else was decent, just not amazing. I did run into some performance issues as I played Immortal Redneck. These weren't usually anything too major, but there were some issues. Now remember, I'm playing on the PlayStation 4 version, so there may be differences depending on the version you're playing. The biggest issue was the occasional crash. Over the course of playing, I probably had it crash maybe half a dozen times or so, which I've probably put in about 40 hours of it, so 6 times over 40 hours isn't a lot, but still more than it should be doing. I'm not really sure what caused it. A couple times it seemed to be going up to a floor on the pyramid, but other times it was just kind of in the middle of a battle or just in the middle of a pyramid floor like that. I don't really know what caused it to crash. Another issue I ran across was game lag, particularly when the redneck would do a voice line. Most of the time this didn't really matter too much as I was not in the middle of battle. However, there were times when there would be a voice line while fighting or picking up a weapon or scroll in the heat of battle that would slow things down and potentially mess me up pretty bad, especially more early on where like if you get hit while it kind of lagged there, that would really be a lot more severe than like say later on when you're fully upgraded and a hit won't really mess you up too much. The final issue I would occasionally get would be items going through the bottom of the map and being unable to collect them. This really only affected scrolls and weapons because I think you pull in the other items within a certain range, so even if you were over them, it would suck them up a little bit. In these cases, it just was kind of hard to see that there were items to pick up sometimes because they would be kind of in the ground and so you wouldn't notice them unless you really looked closely sometimes. Now, this issue didn't really happen a lot either, but it did happen from time to time. Really, I think the main thing that this happened with were the piles of rubble and the little eye monsters that you get in this game, whereas like killing those would result in things kind of spawning under the ground. So that was really about the only time I really mentioned it being a consistent thing. Occasionally, I think it happened with things coming out of a chest, but not very often. Immortal Redneck definitely have some issues in performance, but nothing is severe enough that really detracted from my enjoyment on the long term. I mean, sure, I didn't really want to have to restart the game, but it doesn't take a long time to get back into the game, so it was helpful for that. And there was nothing that really killed the game for me, but there are definitely some issues that I can't really ignore either. Immortal Redneck is an interesting game. While I do like the concept behind an Egyptian mythology themed game like this, the theme is unfortunately pretty thin, and the attempt to merge redneck into the theme just really didn't work for me. Immortal Redneck is not a game you're going to come for a story or a deeply thematic kind of experience. You're going to come to Immortal Redneck if you're a fan of roguelikes and are interested in an FPS variation on the theme, or a fan of fast, frantic first-person shooter games and are interested to see how a roguelike version of that would go. That's because the gameplay is really where Immortal Redneck is going to make or break itself for you. Even if you do like the gameplay, there isn't a lot hidden in Immortal Redneck. With only 3 pyramids to conquer, you will find yourself having to repeat the same pyramids over and over in order to experience the game. There are other classes and gods you can try to play as, but there's nothing really gained by beating the game with the other gods, and while you can unlock more upgrades, if you're already beating the final pyramid easily, upgrades are just going to reduce the challenge for you even further. I do think that if you're an achievement or trophy hunter, you'll find more to enjoy in this game than other players. Going after the achievements will add some legs to the game, as it will give you something more to do beyond beating the 3rd pyramid once and moving on. However, some grindy trophies make even this aspect a bit of a double-edged sword. With all this said, I would probably give Immortal Redneck a 7 out of 10. However, I must admit that this is because I am a gamer that does enjoy going after trophies and trying to earn all of the achievements that the game has to offer. If you aren't, then I could see Immortal Redneck losing a point or two for you, as it may not give you enough to replay after finishing the 3rd pyramid. However, Immortal Redneck is also a $20 game, so I do think there is quite a bit of game here for the price point. I know I've put in 30 to 40 hours and I've enjoyed the vast majority of that time with the game. Maybe only the last 2 to 5 hours starting to really feel like grindy and just like I want to move on from the game. So that's my review for Immortal Redneck. While I had fun with it, I can definitely see that it has its flaws and is definitely not going to be a game for everyone. It's a fun merger of the roguelike and FPS genres, but may lack staying power for those whose only goal is to beat the game and move on. What about your thoughts on Immortal Redneck? Have you played it before? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you kind of agree with where I'm putting it? Does this game look interesting to you if you haven't played it before? Just let me know. Feel free to leave comments, and we'll see you next time.